They judged him by the color of his skin, but they had no idea who he really was. The bustling corporate office of Carter Enterprise, a prestigious multinational firm headquartered in downtown Chicago, was abuzz with activity. The glass-walled building gleamed under the morning sun, its sleek design exuding wealth and power. Inside, employees dressed in tailored suits moved briskly through polished hallways, their heels clicking against marble floors. It was a world where status mattered more than substance, or so it seemed. In stark contrast stood Darius Thompson, a young black intern who had just arrived for his first day. Dressed in a simple navy blue blazer and slacks that were clean but not designer label, he blended into the background like an unnoticed shadow. His name tag read, Intern, Temporary Staff, clipped neatly to his lapel. To those around him, he appeared inexperienced, out of place, even disposable. But there was something about Darius that didn't quite fit the stereotype they'd assigned him. He carried himself with quiet dignity, his posture upright and confident despite the weight of unfamiliar eyes glancing dismissively over him. His dark brown eyes scanned the room with calm attentiveness, missing nothing. When a senior executive accidentally dropped papers near the entrance, Darius was the one who bent down to help pick them up. Not because he felt obligated, but because it was simply the right thing to do. No one noticed how efficiently he organized the scattered sheets, or how his soft-spoken suggestion to use a folder clip saved time. They only saw the surface, a temporary worker, here today, gone tomorrow. As Darius stepped into the elevator alongside two sharply dressed analysts from the finance department, their casual laughter filled the confined space. One of them held a coffee cup branded with the company logo, while the other scrolled through emails on his phone. Neither acknowledged Darius beyond a fleeting glance before resuming their conversation as if he weren't there. The day began with Darius being assigned to shadow Emily Carter, a senior analyst known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. She greeted him with a curt nod, barely acknowledging his presence as she handed him a stack of files. "Just file these alphabetically," she said, her tone implying it was work too menial for her time. Darius accepted the task without complaint, carefully organizing each document in the correct order. As he worked at a small desk tucked away in the corner of the office, two junior associates approached Emily's workstation nearby. Their names were Ryan and Damien, both fresh out of Ivy League schools, both eager to climb the corporate ladder. They glanced at Darius briefly before turning their attention back to Emily. "Hey, Em, need help with anything?" Ryan asked, leaning casually against her desk. His eyes flicked toward Darius again, this time accompanied by a smirk. "Or are we leaving grunt work to temporary staff?" Emily chuckled lightly, but didn't respond directly. Instead, she gestured vaguely toward Darius. "He's just here to assist. Don't worry about him." Damien snickered, his voice low enough that only Ryan and Emily could hear. "Looks like they're scraping the bottom of the barrel now." Darius kept his head down, pretending not to notice. Inside, though, his jaw tightened ever so slightly. He focused on the task at hand, ensuring every file was perfectly aligned. The dismissive comments stung, but he reminded himself that reacting would only validate their assumptions. Later, during a team meeting in one of the glass-walled conference rooms, Darius sat quietly at the far end of the table, taking notes while others discussed quarterly projections. When the topic shifted to potential improvements in client relations, Darius hesitated for a moment before raising his hand slightly. "Yes?" asked Mr. Hargrove, the department head, looking mildly surprised that someone from the intern section had dared to speak up. "I think improving follow-up communication could make a big difference," Darius said calmly. "Clients often feel neglected after the initial pitch, which might affect retention rates." There was a brief pause as everyone processed his suggestion. Then Ryan leaned back his chair, smirking again. "Interesting thought for an intern." A few people chuckled nervously, though no one outright dismissed the idea. Darius simply nodded, jotting something down in his notebook, as if unfazed. But beneath his composed exterior, frustration simmered. He knew his input had merit. He'd seen similar strategies succeed in other businesses. Yet, Instead of engaging with the substance of his comment, they fixated on his perceived insignificance. Still, Darius remained professional. He understood that proving himself wouldn't happen overnight, not when preconceived notions ran so deep. By mid-afternoon, the subtle jabs had escalated into outright mockery. Darius found himself at the center of a growing storm, though he remained outwardly composed. The breaking point came during lunch when Ryan and Damien decided to test his competence in front of their colleagues. "Hey, intern," Ryan called out as Darius passed by the break room. "Since you're so good at organizing files, maybe you can help us with something else." He gestured toward a pile of crumpled receipts on the table. "We need these sorted for expense reports. Think you can handle it?" Darius paused, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the vending machine. Everyone knew this wasn't part of an intern's duties. It was busy work meant to demean him further. Without hesitation, Darius stepped forward and began smoothing out the wrinkled papers. Damien leaned back in his chair, smirking. I heard they only hired temps who couldn't get real jobs. Guess that explains why you're here." A few people chuckled nervously, but no one intervened. Emily, seated nearby, glanced up briefly before returning to her phone, clearly unwilling to risk alienating her peers by defending Darius. The comments grew louder and more pointed as the day wore on. In the afternoon meeting, Damien interrupted Darius while he was presenting a minor update on the filing system. Wait, Damien said, waving a hand dismissively. "Let me guess, you're going to tell us how to alphabetize next?" Groundbreaking stuff. Laughter erupted around the table, though some participants exchanged uneasy glances. Darius didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly continued his presentation, his voice steady despite the tension simmering beneath the surface. What Damien and Ryan didn't realize was that Darius wasn't just enduring their insults. He was observing them. He noticed how Ryan's bravado faltered whenever someone senior entered the room, and how Damien's jokes often masked insecurity about his own performance. But Darius kept these observations to himself, biding his time. As the workday drew to a close, Darius was tasked with delivering a package to Mr. Hargrove's office, a routine errand that should have been uneventful. However, upon entering the executive suite, he overheard fragments of a conversation between Hargrove and another manager. "I don't care what HR says," Hargrove muttered. "We don't need distractions like that around here. It sets a bad precedent." Though the comment wasn't directed at Darius specifically, its implications stung. For the first time all day, Darius felt his composure waver. His hands tightened slightly around the package, and his jaw clenched almost imperceptibly. Still, he knocked politely on the doorframe and announced his presence. "Mr. Hargrove, your package," Darius said, his tone neutral. Hargrove looked up, startled, then quickly masked his surprise. "Ah, yes. Leave it there." Darius placed the package on the desk and turned to leave, but not before catching the fleeting look of guilt in Hargrove's eyes. It was clear the man hadn't expected to be caught speaking so candidly or disrespectfully. Back at his workstation, Darius allowed himself a moment of reflection. Each insult, each condescending remark chipped away at his patience. Yet, instead of anger, he felt a quiet resolve building within him. These individuals weren't just underestimating him. They were revealing their own flaws. The final straw came during an impromptu team meeting in the late afternoon. The group had gathered in the open plan workspace to discuss last-minute adjustments for an upcoming client presentation. Darius, still seated at his small desk nearby, was asked, more like ordered, to fetch coffee for everyone. "Make sure you get it right this time," Ryan quipped as Darius stood up. "We don't need any mistakes." A few people chuckled nervously, though some avoided eye contact altogether. Darius nodded politely, masking his irritation with practiced ease. But when he returned with the tray of coffees, balancing it carefully, Damien decided to take things further. "Oh, great," Damien said loudly, feigning excitement. "Let's see if our intern barista knows how to make a decent latte." He grabbed one cup, sniffed it dramatically, and wrinkled his nose. Smells like disappointment." Guess that's what we should expect from someone who doesn't even belong here. The room froze. Even those who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably, sensing they'd crossed a line. Emily glanced down at her phone, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Ryan smirked but hesitated, perhaps realizing they'd pushed too far. For the first time all day, Darius stopped moving. His hands, which had been arranging the remaining cups on the table, stilled completely. For a brief moment, there was silence, a heavy pause where every heartbeat seemed audible. Then, slowly, Darius turned to face Damien. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his eyes burned with quiet intensity. "You know," Darius began, his voice low yet commanding enough to silence the entire room. "I've spent today listening to your jokes and brushing off your comments because I assumed you'd eventually realize how misplaced they are. Clearly, I overestimated you." Damien blinked, caught off guard by the sudden shift in dynamics. His smirk faltered, replaced by uncertainty. Darius continued, each word deliberate and measured. "Mockery isn't cleverness, it's cowardice. And disrespecting someone based on assumptions says more about you than it ever could about me." The air grew thick with tension. Ryan opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Others exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier bravado evaporating under Darius's unwavering gaze. Without another word, Darius straightened his posture, adjusted his blazer, and walked toward the exit. Before leaving the workspace, he paused briefly and glanced back at the stunned group. "By the way," he added, his tone deceptively casual, "you might want to rethink who you choose to underestimate." With that, he stepped into the elevator, leaving behind a room full of bewildered faces. No one dared to speak as the door slid shut, sealing the moment in awkward silence. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and Darius stepped out with a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space. Gone was the unassuming intern. In his place stood a man who owned every inch of the room he entered. He adjusted his blazer, a subtle but deliberate gesture, and walked toward Mr. Hargrove's office, where the senior leadership team had gathered for an emergency meeting. As he approached, murmurs rippled through the hallway. Employees who hadn't noticed him before now turned their heads, curious about the young black man striding purposefully into restricted territory. When Darius reached the conference room, he paused briefly at the door, meeting the startled gaze of Emily, who was just leaving. Her eyes widened as she recognized him, though she quickly looked away, clearly unsure how to process what she was seeing. Inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately upon Darius's entrance. The executives seated around the table fell silent, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. At the head of the table sat Mr. Hargrove himself, whose jaw dropped slightly when he realized who had just walked in. Darius didn't wait to be acknowledged. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm, yet commanding enough to demand attention. "I'm Darius Thompson, the new CEO of Carter Enterprise." The room froze. Even Hargrove, usually so composed, struggled to find words. Finally, he managed a weak, "Mr. Thompson, we weren't expecting you until next week." "I decided to arrive early," Darius replied smoothly, his tone neutral but laced with meaning. "It gave me time to observe firsthand how certain members of this company conduct themselves." His gaze swept across the table, lingering briefly on Damien and Ryan, who had followed him upstairs after hearing rumors of his arrival. Their smirks were long gone, replaced by pale faces and wide eyes. "Let me be clear," Darius continued, his voice steady and firm. "Respect isn't optional, it's non-negotiable. And competence isn't determined by appearances. Those who fail to understand this will find themselves ill-suited for leadership here." For a moment, no one dared to breathe. The silence in the executive conference room was deafening. Mr. Hargrove, still reeling from Darius's earlier entrance, finally found his voice. "Mr. Thompson," he began cautiously, "we weren't aware you'd be joining us so soon, or that you'd chosen to observe operations firsthand." Darius turned back toward the group, his expression calm but piercing. "Sometimes, understanding a problem requires seeing it up close," he said simply. Then, with a glance at Damien and Ryan, who had followed him upstairs, he added, "And sometimes solutions require addressing root causes." Before anyone could respond, the door opened again. In walked Victoria Langston, Carter Enterprise's chief operating officer and one of Darius's trusted advisors. Her sharp gaze swept over the room before landing on Darius. "I see introductions have already begun," she said smoothly, her tone carrying an edge of authority. Victoria stepped forward, addressing the stunned executives. "For those unfamiliar, allow me to clarify. Darius Thompson isn't just another intern or temporary hire. He is the newly appointed CEO of this company, taking over after his family acquired a majority stake last quarter." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even those who thought they understood the situation now realized how deeply they'd underestimated him. Emily covered her mouth in shock, while Damien and Ryan exchanged panicked looks, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of the truth. Darius let the revelation sink in for a moment before speaking. "This morning, I arrived as an intern, a role I took voluntarily to gain insight into our operations. What I observed instead was a culture riddled with prejudice and disrespect. That ends now." His words hung heavy in the air, each syllable laced with resolve. The executives shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact altogether. Victoria continued, her voice firm. "Effective immediately, there will be zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior within this organization. Any employee found engaging in such conduct will face immediate disciplinary action. We expect better, not just because it's right, but because respect drives excellence." As she spoke, Darius locked eyes with Damien and Ryan. Their earlier smirks were long gone, replaced by expressions of dread. They knew they were cornered, and that justice was inevitable. Before dismissing the group, Darius delivered one final statement. "Tomorrow, we'll reconvene to discuss specific measures to address these issues. Until then, reflect on your actions and consider whether you're truly committed to being part of this company's future." With that, Darius and Victoria exited the room, leaving behind a sea of shaken faces. The anticipation of what would come next weighed heavily on everyone present. For Damien and Ryan, however, the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Darius called an emergency assembly in the main conference room. The atmosphere was tense as employees filed in, their murmurs filling the space. Damien and Ryan sat near the back, their faces pale and drawn, while Emily avoided eye contact with everyone. When Darius entered, the room fell silent. Dressed in a tailored suit that exuded authority, Darius took his place at the head of the table. His presence commanded attention, and even those who hadn't witnessed yesterday's events could sense the gravity of the moment. "Good morning," Darius began, his voice calm but firm. "Yesterday, I arrived here as an intern, a role I chose to better understand our operations. What I observed instead was behavior unworthy of this company or its values." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Respect isn't optional, it's foundational. Yet some individuals have demonstrated a blatant disregard for this principle. Their actions not only undermine morale, but also tarnish the reputation of Carter Enterprise." Damien and Ryan exchanged panicked glances as Darius turned his gaze toward them. "For example," he continued, "mocking someone based on assumptions isn't clever, it's cowardly. And treating colleagues with disrespect reflects poorly on all of us." The two men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame. Darius didn't stop there. "As CEO, I will not tolerate such behavior. Effective immediately, Damian Lewis and Ryan Carter are placed on formal probation. Their conduct will be closely monitored, and any further incidents will result in termination." A collective gasp rippled through the room. No one had expected such swift and decisive action. Darius then addressed the broader team. "This isn't just about punishment, it's about accountability. Each of you has a responsibility to foster a culture of respect and inclusivity. To ensure this happens, we're implementing mandatory training sessions on workplace ethics and bias awareness." Turning back to Damien and Ryan, Darius added, "You'll also issue public apologies to me and to your colleagues for your behavior. This isn't about humiliation. It's about learning and growth." Both men nodded quickly, too stunned to protest. Later that day, they stood awkwardly in front of the assembled staff, offering halting but sincere apologies. Their voices trembled, and their usual bravado was nowhere to be found. As the meeting concluded, Darius delivered a final statement. True leadership isn't about power, it's about respect. Respect for others, regardless of their title or background. Let this be a lesson to us all. The room erupted into quiet applause, signaling a turning point for the company. For Damien and Ryan, however, the emotional toll was evident. They left the room visibly humbled, their arrogance stripped away by the consequences of their actions. And Darius? He watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction, knowing the first step toward meaningful change had been taken. Weeks later, Carter Enterprise was unrecognizable from the workplace Darius had first walked into as an intern. The once toxic culture of arrogance and prejudice had begun to shift, replaced by a palpable sense of accountability and mutual respect. Damien and Ryan, humbled by their public reprimand, made genuine efforts to change. Damien started mentoring junior staff, sharing insights he'd previously hoarded for himself. During team meetings, he actively encouraged quieter voices to speak up, a stark contrast to his earlier dismissiveness. Ryan, meanwhile, volunteered to lead diversity workshops, using his own mistakes as cautionary examples. Though some colleagues remained skeptical at first, the consistent actions gradually earned back a measure of trust. The broader impact was evident across the company. Employees who had once feared speaking out now felt empowered to address concerns without hesitation. Emily, in particular, underwent a transformation. She became one of Darius's strongest allies, advocating for inclusive hiring practices and spearheading initiatives to support underrepresented groups within the organization. Darius continued to shape the environment through both policy and example. He introduced monthly open forums where employees could voice ideas or concerns directly to leadership. These sessions fostered transparency and collaboration, further breaking down hierarchical barriers. Under his guidance, Carter Enterprise implemented mentorship programs pairing senior executives with entry-level staff, an initiative that not only improved skill development, but also humanized relationships between ranks. Even the physical space reflected the cultural shift. Gone were the rigid, isolating cubicles. In their place stood open workstations designed to encourage interaction. Posters promoting inclusivity lined the walls, alongside photos celebrating employee achievements regardless of title or tenure. For Darius, the changes weren't just professional. They were deeply personal. Walking through the office one evening, he paused to observe a group of interns brainstorming ideas with seasoned managers. Their laughter and camaraderie filled the air, a testament to the values he'd worked so hard to instill. As he returned to his office, Darius allowed himself a quiet smile. True excellence, he thought, wasn't built on hierarchy. It was rooted in respect for every individual's contribution. And Carter Enterprise, once a symbol of elitism, had become proof of that enduring truth. Think back to a time where someone attempted to harass you or take advantage of you. We would love to hear your stories and how you handled it. Share your experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this and want more content on inspiring Black Stories channel like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and remember, embrace your strength and keep moving forward.